Yeah.
All right. Well, welcome to our first annual, or maybe last annual, depending on how this goes, live Q&A podcast in which you, the listener, get to kind of drive this conversation with all of your questions and about what it looks like to make disciples, to participate in the Great Commission. So, because that's what we are all about at Icon Ministries. Our mission is to see disciples everywhere, loving like Jesus. And we accomplish that here in our context by God's grace, by initiating love and friendship and self-sacrifice, belonging, hospitality, empowerment, which all leads to multiplications of disciples of Jesus throughout the world. I'll be the host this evening. I'm Ryan Seibert. I'm joined today by some of our Icon Ministries staff. Let me give a little roll call here. So first, the OG, the indomitable Lewis Fitch Clark, the third, sorry, to the second and the first out there. Lewie, say hello.
Hello.
That's very well said. Also, the indestructible Doug Hunt, who's been sick the past few days, so he may sound like he smoked a couple cartons today. But Doug, we're happy to have you here.
It's good to be here.
Thank you. Yeah, that's pretty good. And finally, my personal favorite, the incandescent Josi Nicole Seibert.
All right. Hi, guys.
So we're not a panel of experts speaking tonight. We're just a group of practitioners who, for many years or many decades, for some of us here, the more elderly among us, we've attempted to be faithful to the mission and method of Jesus in making disciples. So we look forward to having this conversation with you all. Thanks for joining us. Before we jump into the Q&A, I do need to make a quick confession that I have become the person that I said I would never be. And that's the kind of person who doesn't start listening to Christmas music until November. And so I just want to confess that. I used to be like, come July, I'm starting to sprinkle it in the playlist. September, it's pretty solid. In October, it's full on. And I'm just not there this year. And I remember one October, remember Pandora, when that was like the way you listen to music? I remember Pandora used to limit you to 40 hours a week. 40 hours a month streaming mobile. And I remember getting a notification from Pandora that I had reached my limit. And it was October 3rd. I'd been in the Yuletide tunes pretty hard that year. So I appreciate your prayers. I'll try to do better next year. Thank you for your accountability. Okay, so before we get started with the Q&A, Lewie, Doug, Josi, would you guys please just give us kind of a 30-second definition to you of what it means to make disciples, just to kind of get us all on the same page and what we're talking about here. Lewie?
Well, in a word, it's love, because Jesus said, men will know you're my disciples by your love for one another. And that is the mark that a person is a follower of Jesus, is that love for one another. And so it's discipling them in the love of God and what that means, and being accepted by God in the gospel of God, the good news, and teaching them how to belong and how to love others well. So.
Very good. Thank you, Lewie. Josi, what do you got?
I agree with what Lewie said. And I would also say, for me, it's helpful for me to frame it in spiritual companionship. I think being able to help my disciple understand where God is at work in her life. So I think that Jesus is the author and perfecter of our faith. So I don't claim expertise. I don't claim that I'm the one behind the scenes. But I feel like I can be a guide and I can be a friend. So yeah, I kind of like to think of it in terms of spiritual companionship.
Yeah, I like that picture. Doug Hunt, your 30 seconds and go.
Right. Yeah. I've thought about this a lot and have really wrestled through a definition for a lot of years. So, but I kind of boil it down to this and it really comes out of the idea of a disciple as a student. And in the life of Jesus, that for me, and this is going to sound very definition like, that to make disciples is to teach someone to follow Jesus through an intentional, loving relationship so that they can go and do the same. And for me, the multiplication part of it is a big deal, because it is go into all the world, and it is to see disciples multiplied. And so in that relationship, that spiritual companionship, in the relationship of love, it is because of the goodness and the importance of the mission of Jesus in that, but teaching someone through an intentional relationship of love to follow Jesus.
Yeah, I like it. I like it a lot. I think mine would probably just be a simpler stating of yours, Doug, that I just feel like it's walking alongside someone, helping them take a step closer to Jesus. The walking alongside, putting it in the context of relationship and getting towards Jesus, because that's all of us, regardless of which side of the line of faith that we're on. Like, we all need to walk lockstep with him and take a step towards him. So, okay, thanks for putting those on the table there. So if you are on this call, we're so glad you're here. If you could all mute yourselves, that would be helpful. And then if at any point, if someone has a question, feel free to unmute yourself. You could also put that into the chat, and type that in, and we'll try to get to as many of those questions as we can. So great. So now we'd like to open it up. Anybody, I just told you all to mute yourself. Anyone wants to unmute themselves and ask the first question or type that into the chat, that would be great. And it is sometimes hard to be first, so we're going to skip the first question and go straight to the second one.
Which is Gary Seibel, right?
Most likely.
I'm just kidding.
Well,
I'm
if
kidding,
you
Gary.
need me to get this thing kicked off, I will.
Please do.
I don't know that I have anything specific right off the top. First, I just want to say how grateful I am for all of you people that are a part of Icon. You know, all with the exception of Doug, who's had no help in my life whatsoever. He's been absolutely minimal, with the exception of some music that he's played throughout the years. No, I really do appreciate what you've done in me, and what your impact is on people I'm discipling and people that I'm talking to. And I've got several things. I actually wanted to talk. Lisa's here with me. She's not going to be on camera because she's been working all day. It didn't feel good. And we just got back from being on what most people think of as a vacation. We went to Disney World for too long, and so she's wore out. But just how that relates to, I think that the dynamic for me with a lot of dudes is pretty easy. We have found that couples are not completely outlandishly hard. Like there's a lot of the dynamic of the couple when we end up meeting with them, just by the nature of how that relationship comes forth in our lives, usually it seems to be fine. But as far as women are concerned and just discipling girls, it's like a totally different thing. Like, and it's, you know, it's obviously true with having daughters. You know, I tell my kids to suck it up, and just, you know, the response is different than what it is for when I say that to a guy. You know, I'm like, hey, the same, you know, just like with Lisa, if I tell Ryan, well, you just need to suck it up and get in there and handle your business, and Ryan's like, all right, that's what I'm going to do. And if I were to say that to Josi, she'd be like, I don't know why you don't like me, you know, or whatever. And so anyways, how that works for discipling women, Lisa's just found it incredibly difficult. It's like, it's just a crisis to crisis moment as opposed to developing a relationship. So there you go. That's a good first question.
Josi, what do you think?
Well, when you say crisis to crisis moment, like it's more like the women in Lisa's life are reaching out to her in crisis only, and there's not necessarily like between the gaps of that. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, I would say, like, for instance, we've been very fortunate. So this has come about, just to kind of give some criterion here and background. So I disciple several different dudes at this point in my life. That's going pretty good in different ways. Lisa and I, several years ago, met with our church staff about doing like premarital counseling. We're like, hey, we want to help people that want to get married and do premarital counseling. So we did like this whole little counseling session, and they come back to us and they go, hey, how would you guys feel about meeting with couples that are already married, but like not loving marriage like they thought they were going to? And so we were like, no, that does not sound near as fun as telling people about how awesome it's going to be when they get married. but we ended up doing it anyway. And so for me, when we have these guys, man, the guys will call and they'll call with like normal stuff and we can have these conversations. But like Lisa, it's more the girls will only call when it's like they're in a big fight or they're having this. And so I think that's been like a little bit of a struggle for her. She feels like if she's calling them outside of those windows, it's kind of bothering them. But how do you bridge the gap between those moments of I'm crying, so I'm calling you at 11 o'clock because we're in this big fight, and hey, let's just regularly do lunch or something? And it sounds like it's a lot easier for me because I'll just be like, hey, you want to go do lunch? And that's not a problem. But I just think girls are harder, it seems. Or maybe Lisa's no good at it. I don't know. It could just be Lisa.
Oh, I doubt that. Lisa's great. Yeah, I mean, I think moments of crisis, or sometimes around here, we refer to those moments as like defining moments, which is incredibly important for Lisa to be available in those moments for sure. Just to, yeah, be accessible, help, listen. And those moments really can sort of act as glue in the relationship to being able to then like allow for space to have coffee dates or lunch dates or have the couple over to your place for dinner. I think, I don't know, you mentioned about maybe Lisa feeling like she's bothering them if she's trying to connect with them throughout the week. And I would probably push back on that. Maybe there might be a woman that's definitely giving off that vibe of like, hey, I want my own space, like this is too much. But I feel like it's the relationship in my life where I was discipled by some woman that it did feel a little bit like maybe she was like pushing in, and in a way that I was a bit uncomfortable, but it's what took us to the next level of friendship. And I think that is sometimes what happens in disciple making is you're connecting in a relational way where, in a very intentional way. And a lot of people, especially Western culture, just friendship is hard. And we're a lot more comfortable with like keeping our own space. So I think that is just an opportunity maybe for Lisa to show them another way to connect and another way to show up. And it does take vulnerability, and that's hard and it's risky. But that's part of the disciple making process too.
Doug, what do you think?
I was asking Lisa if she had anything she wanted to add that was in with that, but she coughed and said she appreciates it. Anything? No. Okay.
I think you asked if I had anything to add to that, Lewie, and well, it's a little different for me as it relates to discipling females. It's very much part of, my wife Shelley is very much a part of that. But I think, what defining moments or whatever it was, the term that Josi used, I think that is such, those are so often very much Holy Spirit moments that where what God is doing in us and what God is doing in them, where we really have an opportunity to connect and to love. And I know that, and I think, in some ways it does. There are guys in my life, they're hard, they're in the sense they're not, everything in their life is not easy, and they're not always in a good place, and they're not always hungry or whatever, but the place where it seems that I am really meeting with them and God in their life is in the midst of that hard moment of their life. And I think when those things come, those are moments maybe that I would say those are opportunities for us to lay down our life. When Jesus says greater love is no one than this, then he lay down his life for his friend. When someone is in a crisis moment, that is where we have that possibility to say, what does it mean for me to lay down my life here? And that's hard. And sometimes it feels like you're just constantly dealing with, crisis or whatever, and it doesn't seem like things are going in the way that you would hope they would go, but there's no doubt that the seed of love that is being poured into that person's life is going to grow into something. It's just may not happen in that moment. And so I think we just stay the course in those things. We stay the course with people that are challenging or hard and seem fruitless. And we just have to trust that the Spirit is at work in the midst of all of that.
Mhm.
And that's guy or girl. That's anybody.
I'm certainly no expert on women. Thought I was, got married. My ineptitude has been on display for the last almost 12 years. But I wonder too, if for women, I know for a lot of Christian women, their experience is a lot of like self-forgetfulness and like, I need to care for the needs of others. And so there's not time for my needs. There's not space for my needs, Gary. And so as I wonder in that same way, if it's harder for women to enter into a discipleship relationship like that, because it feels selfish, or it feels like, well, I would love to do that, but I need to take care of this. I need to take care of that, and don't make the space, or less likely to make the space, and less likely to have a 9 to 5 where they can meet up with lunch with you, Gary, or something like that. So, yeah.
Well, as a single guy, let me weigh in here, because I know so much about women.
Put on your doctorate.
If you held a gun to my head, I think the problem has probably been the American evangelical church in this question with disciple making in women, because it's moving the sacred place from the church building to the home, and the home being the primary place of disciple making. And I think women are geared towards that. They, tell it to your children, your children's children. That's for men and women, but the women take usually the ones who lead on that. And one of the things that I've learned this year that was fascinating in the Jewish community, they cannot separate the spiritual formation from Proverbs 31 and the Proverbs 31 woman. So every week, the husband reads part of Proverbs 31 as a blessing over his wife, because again, the home is a sacred place. And to me, moving disciple making back to the home, for example, beginning with everything we do with the children in mind first. What does that look like? And then what role does the mother and father both play in that within the home, rather than this ancillary thing out here? A lot of men's disciple making ministry is outside of the church, and is outside of the family. And if I don't know your wife, I don't know you. If I don't know your kids, I don't know you. I need to see you in the context of your family to know you, and then also to help disciple you.
Yeah, great point, Louis. Gary, good question. Thank you for throwing that out there. All right, other questions people would like to offer out there? There is, while you're formulating your question, a question that we often get is, how do you begin discipling someone? Where do you start? And I guess, and wrapped up in that is, how do I even know who I should disciple? How would you guys speak to that? How do I know who I should disciple? How should I begin discipling someone?
Are you asking us that question?
I am, Louis.
Yeah, Ryan, can I add to that? Because it kind of goes to the question I was going to ask.
Yeah, please do, Stephen.
Are discipleship relationships chosen by God? Are they chosen by us? And if it's the former, how do we know? And if you're open to expanding your influence in discipleship, how do you know when that connection is the right one? So that's kind of the question I have.
Yeah, great question.
I think discipling in community and as a group changes the dynamic of that. I mean, American evangelicalism, disciple making that I grew up in was one-on-one, is how it was done. And I think when you look at the example of Jesus, he discipled in community. And you look even at the Apostle Paul, and he always was in team. And I think for us in Chicago here, I can't with Doug's and Dalton, so from the same ministry but different cities, is that we as a team, who are the people that God's bringing us in, bringing across our paths? Are these people we should invest in, or how should we invest in them? And what do we had a guy recently who that we've come across, and we've just talked about, with Ethan, who's here in Chicago too, Ethan and Annie and Ryan and Josi, okay, who's going to disciple him? Is this someone that God's bringing into our path? And I do think the Spirit of God does direct me and bring me people to me that are just, you can just see the supernatural hand to bring them into your living room or come across them somewhere. But I think as a community, discerning those things, and then discerning what is the best path for this woman, this man in the disciple making process. Doug, I'd be interested in what you have to say.
Yeah, I one way that I would talk about that, Lewie and everyone, is, and I'm still learning in this. Yeah, I have 3 kids, ages 19, 16, and 10. And those are the kids that God gave me, and those are they and my wife, they are the primary discipling relationship in my life. So I don't, from a family perspective, it's I have to remember that I don't want to miss sort of miss the forest for the trees. I think it sort of fits into that somehow, is be thinking, who am I going to disciple out there when there are these people right here that they are my family. They are the ones that God has put in my life to shepherd and nurture and grow, hopefully as disciples of Jesus. And then so I think about them first, and that's coming from the family perspective. I don't, I could talk about that a long time, but I'll stop there. But that's sort of the number one place. But then really it is like, and I think the longer I have been going in disciple making, the more I'm finding myself praying, Holy Spirit, just lead who you want into my life, and help me see them, and help me love them in a way that would please you. And it's been really crazy, the people that God brings into my life, people that are very, very different than me, that I would have never, like, if I were hand picking the ones that I were going to hang out and invest in, many of the people that God's put in my life, I probably wouldn't have picked if it was up to me, because they're so different than me, but that's been the beauty of it too, of God. I think when you're really just going in the flow of life and praying, God, who would you have me disciple, or however you would pray that, when you're really open to that, it's amazing who God will bring into your life. And then it is casting the seed. It's building the relationship. It's, not forcing any doors open, but walking through each door, each moment through them as the Spirit allows. And as I think, as I have grown in approaching it from that way, it has been much more, I guess, natural, clear even, and just better, because I feel like I'm kind of taking myself out of the driver's seat when I really am trying to depend upon the Holy Spirit. And he makes it clear, as long as I can not be too knuckleheaded and miss him.
Randy Ferguson is on here. He's the guy in the blue sweater and the white beard. Randy's been doing disciple making longer than any of us. So how would you answer that, Randy? I'd be interested in your perspective.
Well, I think in my immaturity in disciple making, I first began thinking that somehow I could pick a disciple. Through my exposure to the navigators in my teens and early 20s, they had a list of fat and hungry. And after a few of those failures, because there's always a mixture of the flesh and the spirit going on in war on us, and we think that we can do something when it's really God who wants to do something. But then I began to look at Jesus's life and realize that in the disciple making relationship, he was the determining factor. And so he could literally have discipled anyone. And so that moved me into an idea that everyone and anyone is a potential disciple for me. No one is disqualified by anything I could put in my mind about them with hopes and dreams or failures and frustrations, whatever it was. Because in our disciple making relationship, Jesus is still the determining factor. Not me, and it's not the disciple. So then all of you have already said that you kind of expect God to bring those people into your life, because we know we make our plan, but God orders every step of every person. And so that's been the trait in the recent past, just to watch for who God is putting, and either recognize a holy discontent in their life or try to encourage a holy discontent in my relationships and conversations with them, just until they become hungry and not necessarily see something in me, but see something in Christ.
Great. Thanks, Randy. Stephen, is that kind of getting at the heart of your question?
Yeah, it is. It is. I agree. I just, yeah, I do think that God maybe orchestrates it much more than we do the choosing, for sure. And it's better when it happens like that. So just curious what the panel thought on that.
And I think for me, prayer, I mean, I'm Kevin, by the way, I joined in late, but I think there have been seasons where it's been, where really there's no connection made. And then I have to begin praying, Lord, here's my desire. My desire is I want to engage in this. And so then it takes me into this season of prayer, of just letting go, and then not being anxious about it, but just saying, okay, Lord, in your timing, then I will wait. And then for me, the moment I really can say that prayer and let go and wait is usually the time he acts. It's kind of like a kid learning to tie a shoe. The parents waiting to say, let me help. And the child saying, no, I want to do it. And then finally they give up, and then they let you help, and the parent acts right away. And so I do think prayer is a vital component of that. Because I'm not very discerning. Ruth can tell you that. And so God has to bring people into my awareness. To somebody, for example, call me up and say, hey, can you meet, or to have someone come in my office and have a conversation. God has to be pretty obvious with me, but it starts with prayer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well said, Kevin. Thanks. All right. Any what's the next question? Who wants to throw one out there? Feel free to unmute and ask away.
I guess I need to mute.
Fine. While we wait, I'll ask my second one, and then if somebody wants to jump in, we'll go out of order. That's fine. But the second one I had revolves around the idea of when you've been in a discipleship relationship long term with someone, how do you deal with, or what do you do when you get stuck on a particular issue or problem that persist in someone over time. So say you've been discipling somebody for 12 years and there's a persistent struggle that they kind of always come back to. And maybe you've tried to address it in dozens of different ways. Like, when you get to that point with someone, and again, in the one I'm thinking of, I've had great progress in tons of ways, but you come back to a particular problem, maybe that they're just literally stuck on, and you're unable to help them get unstuck. I would love to know if you guys have experienced that. What do you do in that situation? And full aware that, like, in my own life, I still struggle with stuff that I struggled with 20 years ago, right? Yeah. So it's not, I think certainly the answer is continue to love them, right? Like, discipleship is a long game, and it always costs you more than you're wanting to pay, right? But I'm just curious, like, because I have this situation in life right now, and I just would love to see this person be liberated from some struggles that have persisted for more than a decade, and I don't seem to know how to fix it, or at least nothing I do does. Just curious, you guys experience this, and what do you do? Maybe that's
no, we've never experienced it. So
yeah, well, I figured, Lewie, that's why I get on with you, man. So
it's only you, Stephen.
Yeah, you can see what you do.
Lewie, I think that's.
Go ahead.
Well, Lewie, that's something I feel like I've learned from you, is that instead of because I'm quick to ask the question, like, what's wrong with this person? And then maybe to say they have a character flaw that just probably will not be changed. But you've always encouraged just to, instead of saying what's wrong with this person, to say, what am I missing? Like, what am I not seeing here? What if we keep returning to the same place? Like, what am I not understanding about this person's heart, their story, their struggle, their fear? And continue to press into that question in prayer, and to continue to press into the relationship, trying to dig at that thing that we're missing. Is that fairly representing, Lewie?
Yeah, I think to quote Randy Ferguson, in my immaturity and disciple making early on in my life, it's like, man, he just don't get it, or he's stubborn, or rebellious, or just doesn't have a heart for God. But along the way, a couple things have happened. One, like Ryan has already said, is rather than looking at them being the problem, what am I missing? And now I would say, what are we missing? Again, we as a team will go through, the individuals in our community, people we're discipling, and especially when we're stuck, and say, okay, what are we missing here? And for example, Dr. Kevin Rawl is on the call here, and he's a psychologist. And when we're stuck, we'll call him and say, here are the issues. What do you think? And because you know what, it could be mental illness. I'll never forget 3 guys in the same time in my same group back in Little Rock, all had learning disabilities. Like they were different disabilities. But the second that was exposed, well, then I changed my whole approach to how I discipled them. They were never going to read the Bible, or read a book. Here, you got to read this book. It's a great new Christian book. They weren't going to do it. They couldn't do it. So how do I disciple them? And again, I saw them being apathetic when in reality, they had a learning disability. And that's why I think, too, a team with different spiritual gifts, looking at it from different angles, to try and figure out, okay, what do we, you can't expect non-discipled people to behave like disciples, okay? And if they could fix it, they probably would. And that's why we have to throw them a rope of hope and help carve a way for them to move forward.
Hey, Lewie, and in this situation, like, it's definitely a one-on-one situation. I'm probably this person's only real friend, and have been for a long, long time. Do you think that the lack of, like, how you'd started off the call talking about we disciple, not one-on-one kind of thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
you think it could be part of a just when it's one-on-one, you're just limited to, my blind spots are my blind spots. I wouldn't know what they are, right?
Sure.
Do you think that broadening that mix is helpful? Do you think one-on-one discipleship creates this problem?
I think it contributes to it. Kevin, how would you jump in here? Because Kevin's discipled a number of men. He's also, like I mentioned, a psychologist. So how would you answer that or address the question?
Yeah, I think Stephen, the thing is we're made to live in community, and I think that's what works for Lewie and Ryan and their group, because they have that such community that's there physically and spiritually and relationally. And I think so that you're right. I think probably one-on-one there are blind spots, and and so you can reach an impasse on things and be aware that you have an impasse, but not know what to do to work through it. And certainly those things require a lot of prayer, and maybe a lot of prayer and fasting together, to say, Lord, we're at an impasse, and how do we pray through this, and how do we fast, and how do we wait on you to show us? That's, to me, that is one aspect, but the other is community. And I think we are built to live in community, and Jesus clearly had community. And those of you who have community know the power of that. And we are limited as each individual, but as the community, they relate to one another differently. Lewie and Ryan, certainly you guys can speak to that, Doug, that when you have community, people will relate to you differently than relate to somebody else. And there'll be an aspect of themselves that they begin to learn about because of how it interacts with someone else. So if you can build community, invite them into community of some aspect in some way, that may help free some of that. But I do certainly think prayer and fasting, and Andrew sent me a link on what was his name, Andrew? The guy with the stakes, stake guy. Anyway, the idea of taking back territory, praying, fasting, doing things differently in that regard.
Yeah.
And we've talked too with you, Kevin, just like, well, at what point in the discipling relationship do we need to refer somebody to a counselor or a psychologist or potentially a psychiatrist for medication? So I don't leave that out of the conversation, Steve. And because I think sometimes we feel like, oh, like we just, keep doing what we're doing. But obviously, like Kevin's mentioning, if you come up against an impasse, right, he's stuck, she's stuck. We'll brainstorm who's the team of people that could surround us right now, and what does he or she need, and how can we connect her or refer her. So yeah, thinking of it in a communal team approach. Yeah, thinking of the person in a holistic way.
Mhm.
And I would add a couple of things in this is, and I know this is not what you're asking, Stephen. I'm pretty sure. We don't. It's not our job to fix people. We love people, and there's this little parable in Luke. I've been thinking about it for probably about 10 years. It takes me a long time to think about stuff, and it's a really small one. And it's where the barren fig tree, and the owner of the tree gets frustrated, and he says to the guy working the tree, he says, just cut it down. It's just wasting space. It's not bearing any fruit. Chop it down. I'm moving on. And guy working the tree just begs him. He says, no, please don't chop it down. Let me dig around it a little bit longer. And what I love about that little story is that, or what, how that challenges me is I may not be able to I can't fix someone's issue or make someone's thing go away, but even when they're walking through that and it seems like they're not going anywhere, they still have you holding out hope for them. And I think just the fact that you are there and you are holding on to hope and you're still digging, and down in that parable, it's like, get down in the manure, get down in the mess of that. And you're not giving up on them just because they're not showing fruit. I think that is so powerful. And it does take more people to get down in the mess. I totally agree with that. Just the power of community in that. But I think if we have the perspective, I'm going to love and I'm going to dig, as long as God has them in our life, we just keep loving and we keep digging. And God is going to work when he's going to work. And it's going to frustrate us and we're going to get mad at them when they don't get it, whatever that means. But we keep digging and we keep loving because God has us there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well said, Doug. Thank you.
One other thing, if I could just say something briefly. I learned this, I guess, with my kids first, but there's two ways to address an issue. One is to directly address it, attack it. And it sounds like, Stephen, you said a dozen times, you've tried a dozen things. But another way is like another parable, Doug, the parable of the tares. Leave it alone and strengthen the crop. So you can actually just look at areas of the life just to strengthen, to distract, to become so valuable in their life that becomes less valuable. And I'm sure that you've tried some of those things, but to focus on the word, or to focus on serving others, or to focus on something else, which requires the community we were talking about. But often when we get our sight off of that one thing and on to more positive things, then the Lord seems to work.
Yep. Great point, Randy. Thank you for sharing that. We got about 15 minutes left, probably time for another question or two. Stephen, you've monopolized the entire time. Are you anything else you want to throw out there?
Yeah, I'll reserve my comments for the sake of the greater whole.
Perfect.
Or my questions, I should say. In other words, I won't monopolize further.
Thanks, man.
I have a question.
Yeah, please go ahead, Alex.
Okay, so within the context of discipleship, like as a family and as a community, I'm just wondering thoughts on how to add people to a healthy community, and how to know your limits on how many relationships you can handle. I'm 24 years old and I just moved to a new city, and I feel like I have like too many relationships to handle, and that is a great gift of God. But I want to know how to choose well, and once I have my relationships that I feel like I'm committed to, how to go about adding in a healthy way, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Great question. You're just so popular, Alex. It's your curse, huh?
That's right. Let's go first. Doug, you've just gone through the agony of that in some ways.
Yeah, I don't know if agony is the right word, Lewie, but it's kind of an interesting thing, because when you love people well, people want to be around you, and so that's a good thing, you know. And the world is starving for people who love well. And so I would say keep loving well, but you really can only love so many people well. And I don't know if there's a magic number in that, you know. I think it really is, you know, Jesus went up in Luke 6 and prayed all night. okay, God, you brought these people. Now I'm going to pray all night, and I'm going to pick these 12. And his relationship with those 12 was very different than everybody else. And I know that's, prayer is such a Sunday school answer, but it's actually a really good answer too. And then I think, as a community is developing, adding people into it very slowly and very carefully with the community, the entire community's involvement in that, figuring out a way for everyone to just be a part of that process. And I know that sometimes that may be easier in some situations than in others, but I do think that that everyone's voice in their life and in your life of giving you wisdom as to who to add is a powerful thing. But really, you do have to learn to be okay with limit. And that's hard. It sounds so I don't know what, it just doesn't, it sounds backwards to limit, but you really can only love so many well.
And it's interesting that in our families we're willing to limit, knowing that I have, I'm just going to keep to my wife, I'm going to keep to my husband, I'm not going to sleep around, I'm not going to. And then when you have children, you bring in the parameters even more, because you got nap times, bedtimes, cost of each child, and saving for their college. And it's the long game. Like you take the Cyberts here, Rich and Jackie, and they had 2 children. They loved them well. And now you have, is it 5 grandkids? Is that how many? Yeah. Is that right? 4 grandkids, 4 grandchildren. And that's the legacy to live on after them. And who knows how many great and great grandchildren will be, but they chose to limit in the end in order to multiply. And that's what I think in First Thessalonians, when Paul writes to them and says, you became a model to all believers in Macedonia and Achaia. Your message, the Lord's message, rang out not only in Macedonia and Achaia. Your faith in God has become known everywhere. And then he says to them later in chapter 3 about how that their love increases more and more, their love for one another specifically more and more. And I think love is what is multiplying, and love is the gospel. God sent God demonstrated his love for us, and while we were sinners, Christ died for us. And so I think, once again, the bottom line is love. And if you love well, it will multiply, but you can only love so many people, And I want to go to a point Doug made too, where, it's kind of like my mom, she had 7 children. And we go, Mom, how did you do it? She goes, as the kids got older, the older kids took care of the younger kids. In some ways, it got easier. And I think too, as people mature, like Kyle Vanover, when he came with us 10 years ago, was at one place spiritually, but now he's at the place where he can shepherd and speak into people. And so I think that also makes it easier in the multiplication process, which makes more room. See, because one of the things when Ryan and I came here, to guiding point things we had is we'd only grow as fast as we could disciple people, and as well as we could love one another well, where we had enough sticky where people could belong to us and be loved well. Because the second you have more people to disciple than disciplers, you've swamped the boat. The second you have more people to love than you have lovers, then you've swamped the boat. And once you swamp that boat, you cannot unswamp it. Trust me. I've been there several times. And that's one of the things we've really tried to stay true to here is, and that's why the dinner table, limiting it to the dinner table, because that's basically 12 people, as far as the size goes and the hospitality.
Mm-hmm. Josi, do you have anything to add to that idea of how many people?
Yeah, I mean, I just asked myself the question, like, how many people can I be a good friend to? And I find, I think you mentioned in your question, just like, how can you tell, if you're at capacity? And for me personally, I can tell when I'm at capacity when I start getting resentful. I resent that person texted and asked for help for something, and I'm like, okay, to me that's a red flag that maybe I'm in over my head. And I think Louie's right, or Doug is right in the comment of like, limiting and setting boundaries doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel Christian. It feels like opposite of what we've been told, to sacrifice and die to yourself and all of these things. So it does make my skin kind of crawl a little bit, but practically speaking, I understand the necessity of it. And so I think it's like, do you want to have a lot of breadth and have lots and lots of friends? Or could you, hone in a little bit and think through, like, who could I go really deep with? Because I think there's a lot of beauty in depth. And when we think about relational disciple making as love and friendship and hospitality, it does require a lot of us, and it does require Jesus also cares about us as a person and our well-being, and that comes with recognizing our limits and what our capacity is. Also knowing that our capacity changes in seasons. So we can't ever really say, oh, my limit or my capacity, is 3 or 5 forever. I think it's just like really being mindful of your season and what God has entrusted to you, and what you can say yes to and what you could say no to in order to say yes to other things. And so I think it's just, it's a process, and it will change as your season of life changes. But just, be honest with yourself and trust the Spirit.
That's good. Thank you, Josi.
Yeah, and I think,
And then, go ahead.
just real quickly, and I think too, always remember that you're going to have some permanence to your community, right? There's going to be a core group of people that will probably stay together for a long, long time. But disciple making is about bringing people in to send them out. And it's always about that, of loving them well, bringing them in to send them out, because it really is about multiplying the body, right? It's about growing the body, in Christ. And I think and while we want to have a community that stays intact, never changes, always loving, always count on that, that's a nice thing. But I think a lot of people that come into our communities are there for a period of time, and accept that, and even talk about there's a readiness to move on, I think.
I think the fear of disappointment, I don't want to disappoint anybody. So someone comes and says, I want to be part of your community, that happens, or will you please disciple me? Well, it may be hard for me to say no to them, but I'm going to say no to somebody, because I'm already discipling these people, these guys, and I don't have enough margin to add another guy. So I'm going to be disappointed to somebody. And, I'm already committed and invested in these men I'm already discipling. So it's hard, but I think the harder thing is overcommitting myself, and then I'm not discipling anybody well, because I've let the community get too big, and so the belonging piece is not there. So,
hey, can you hear me?
yes.
All right. Can I say something with that?
Please.
So this kind of leads into a little bit of a question. It's kind of a funny story, but along those lines. So I found myself getting to a point where I was discipling people and kind of excited about it, and it was going really well, like it has been for a few years. And so seeing growth, and people are different. And don't get me wrong, I got people at different stages. I got a guy that's like was cheating on his wife and wasn't really living for Jesus, versus a guy that was raised in church, parents a pastor, his in-laws are pastors, never had discipleship. And then here I come along and I'm like, hey, let's talk about discipleship. And anyways, that being said, I found where people were just like referring people to me, like, hey, oh, you need to go meet with Disciple, you know, or I'd meet a guy at a bar and they would have these conversations with me and I'd be, you know, like, I should disciple this guy, but I can't. And I mean, one of the things that was really neat though, that's occurred recently is I've finally got some guys that I've been discipling, a guy named Dennis in particular. And it's like he's ready for his own disciples now, right? Like, and I think that there's a degree of within Christianity, at least within the church that I've been a part of, well, multiple churches I've been a part of, is like we don't fully understand that Jesus didn't kick Judas out of the group. You know, like Judas still hung out, like Jesus was still hanging out with them. And so like, I'll have conversations with people and they'll be like, yeah, well that guy, like, you know, you guys are saying he just doesn't get it. It's like, well, this person's not coming to Jesus as quickly as we want. So we're inviting a different guy. And that's been an interesting thing to me. It's always kind of bothered me. But that being said, it's like really cool now because I'm seeing some of these guys where when I meet a person and I think, man, this guy needs discipled, I'm now asking myself, okay, is this for me to disciple, or is this like God putting this person in my life to push that person to a guy that I'm discipling that's ready to disciple? And then I think the other thing is like with the ready to disciple thing, like it's kind of like saying, are you ready to have kids or are you ready to get married? Well, no, you're never ready to have kids. You're never really ready to get married. You may want to have sex. That doesn't make you ready to get married. You're never ready. And I think it's the same thing with discipleship. It's like, you're not really, obviously there's people that are not living for Jesus that should be discipling people. But like, you know, now I've found that I can just simply, if that person is really there to be discipled and it's of God and I'm out of margin, then I can simply say to him, you know, hey, I really want you to meet a buddy of mine. I think you guys are going to hit it off, and I think he could really help you. I don't make it weird where it's like, oh, we're going to disciple you, and here's this chart of discipleship. And man, I found that in the last few months that has worked. I got a guy that's an atheist guy. He's a bartender, and so I've got him with this other guy, and we've had lunch a couple times, and I'm about to just like, hey man, now this is you. You reach out to this dude and you start trying to love him with no other agenda than love, which I learned greatly from Ryan, even more so than Lewie. So there, Lewie, how about that? But anyways,
Okay.
but that being said,
Yeah.
I do want to bring up, so the question, that's like a lot of comment. The question though is, like, at what point do you start to encourage the people that you're discipling, like, hey, you need to start looking for people to disciple?
Yeah, good question. And we're about to wrap up our time here. It's been an hour. Lewie, do you want to address that and then wrap up?
Well,
and
I
then
like
we
your
can
Doug.
stick around here.
I'd like to hear what Doug has to say on that. I know what I think.
Sounds good. But it's 9 o'clock on Doug. I don't know if he turned into a pumpkin and gone to sleep on us.
Close. Well, and my answer is going to be frustrating probably, but it's just different with everyone.
Yeah.
And, you know, part of it is just having a sense of what God is doing in someone's life and the people that are in their life. Because sometimes, you know, I can think of multiple instances where I was more than saying, hey, it's time for you to disciple someone. I was more pointing out the obvious of, okay, look at this relationship in your life and what you mean to that person. And then helping them have a different perspective, or maybe a discipleship or kingdom perspective of their life. And that's what, you know, a way that I think about the disciple making or talk about it sometimes is so much of it is about the perspective that we have of people. it's, do we have a kingdom perspective of everybody around us? And I think it was Randy was saying something about that, that everyone, Jesus could have discipled anyone, and everyone is worthy, and everyone is worthy in their equal unworthiness. And so for me, sometimes it's just helping, it depends on the person, where they are. I think it's a spirit-led thing. Is it obvious, or am I having to force them into this? And most of the time for me, it's been pretty obvious.
Yeah. How do I know that tomato plant is a tomato plant and it's mature? Is there's fruit on it? And it's just like our kids going out on their own and getting ready for their own, getting married and all. It's just you see the fruit. I think the fruit of love and reproduction. So, well, thank you guys. I don't know, Ryan, what you're gonna do.
Well,
Sure,
we'll wrap this up officially here. If our executive producer Lewie Clark could end the recording, and then those who wish to hang out a little longer or ask more questions, we can do that. But